Now we're having a chance to learn what are the updates in relation to doing business in Canada. We have a very interesting group of panelists. The moderator is John Sorensen, and the Canadian Consul is here as well, Honorary David Alward, Tim Ranza, and last but not least, the lady on the panel, Alan Keith. So enjoy it, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you'd like me to grab the microphone?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay.
I'll help you with that.
Thank you. Maybe not. Thank you. Well, good morning, and will be afternoon here shortly. I'm John Sorensen, the president of New England Canadian Business Council. I have a couple of my predecessors here, Ben and Bob, which are good to see. And we look forward to talking about the United States and Canada and our cross-border relationship today. To my right, as you saw, we have David Alward, who is the Canadian Consulate General. We're excited, and he will be leading us off. To my left, Ellen Keefe, who deals with immigration issues on frankly, a daily basis between the two countries. And we have the Chief Innovation Officer here, and Tim is with John Hancock Manulife and actually had a nice walk over here with a new office space, so that worked out quite well. And I will pull up the rear and talk about the energy issues as it relates to Canada and the United States and some of the things that we're dealing with. So again, thank you for attending. Thank you for being here. And we're going to start off with David Alwood.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. I'll take a few minutes just to give you a little bit of a sense what the consulate, the Canadian consulate that's based in Boston, serves New England does. Then I thought I would spend a bit of time talking about the relationship between the U.S. and Canada and ultimately what that means through trade and commerce to each other's prosperity. So the consulate, we have about 25 people on the ground in New England on behalf of Canada working here. Most are actually locally engaged Americans who work on behalf of Canada, and then we have a number of Canadians who are based here as well. Three basic things we do. One is consular, so those are services to Canadians because of the number of Canadians in this region. When they're in emergency service, in need of emergency care. So it could be things like passport services, things related to the law, etc. Most of our time and our largest group that are based in Boston are tied to trade and commerce. We work on some different things, but primarily sector related and then also innovation related. So we have trade commissioners that focus because of the ecosystem here on life sciences and all the various aspects of the life science ecosystem, on defense, aerospace, robotics, ocean technology, on technology and on agri-food, seafood, et cetera, because again of the amount of trade in the hub that we have located in New England. Very importantly, because of the innovation ecosystem that exists here, Canada operates a technology accelerator in Cambridge in the Innovation Center, and I'll actually, as soon as I'm finished here, I'll be heading over there this afternoon, where we offer opportunities for Canadian startup companies to come down here and spend an immersion program of about 4 months in this ecosystem, looking at things like access to venture capital, access to markets, more research and development, that part of it. The other piece that's all interconnected, both of our countries are very well educated. And you look again what's going on in New England with the universities here. We do a lot of work connecting researchers, connecting collaboration between universities, and very importantly, looking at how we can attract Canadian students who have been here or American students who may be interested in going back to Canada and help us grow our economy. So those are some of the basic things we do. Now, what is the relationship between Canada and the U.S.? You know, we're the world's largest trading relationship. We have the largest border between us, a line that separates us. Very importantly, we're interconnected in many different ways. So if we think about, and again, I'll bring it back to New England, 35% of New Englanders have and can take some of their roots back to especially Eastern Canada. So there's a long historic, in many ways familial, importantly cultural tie between Canada and the U.S., which is great for both countries. Really importantly on trade, I said earlier that we're the largest trading relationship. What that actually means is it's just about $700 billion a year in bilateral trade of goods and services back and forth. Since the beginning of the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, the amount of trade between our countries has actually quadrupled. So a huge impact over the last basically 30 years. If you add to that trade in goods and services investment, it's about $1.5 trillion annually between Canada and the U.S. Now, to put that into an impact between for Canadian workers and U.S. workers, trade with Canada in the U.S. creates or sustains, maybe is a better way to say it, 9 million jobs across the U.S. In New England, it's over 400,000 jobs. In Massachusetts alone, it's over 200,000 jobs. And very often, people may not think directly how that could impact them. The big difference between trade between Canada and the U.S. and many other nations is the trade between our nations is truly bilateral. And what I mean by that is it doesn't create jobs in only one country or the other country. It creates jobs in both countries because we build things together. So we have, in many ways, and growing all the time, fully integrated value chains on both sides of the border. And they often talk about the auto industry, but it's much broader than the auto industry. So what that actually means is when Canada exports something to the U.S., a specific item, on average 25% of the components of that item were originally made by a skilled person in the U.S. and a community in the U.S. and exported initially to Canada. So not only are the jobs being created in Canada to make that item, to export it to the U.S., very importantly, those jobs were created in the U.S. to begin with and then export it to Canada. So there's a benefit back and forth to each other. To give you a sense how that compares to other places, it's about 10 times more intense than trade between U.S. and China, U.S. and India, U.S. and Europe. So on average for those nations, it's somewhere between 2 and 4% components that would have originated in the U.S. So the real benefit between trade between Canada and the U.S. is we've got that bilateral opportunity. And what that means is we've got strong communities like Boston or Springfield, wherever it happens to be, and also on the other side of the border. Not unlike what is taking place in the U.S. There are lots of disruptive forces, if we want to call it that, if we look at innovation and technology and what is taking place. Both the U.S. and Canada are leading innovation or innovative economies and countries. Both have very well educated citizens. So the opportunity for businesses to grow and expand, to develop, to invest in Canada make a lot of sense because of the strength of our economy, very importantly, the quality in terms of education of our people, and the innovative ecosystem that's taking place. The other thing that where we have a lot of commonality is both being democracies, both being based on the rule of law, and very importantly, if you look at global quotients on things, and they measure things like corruption, we're very low when you look at the rest of the world. So for companies, we're a great place to invest. Number one in the world, if you look at many studies, but the latest one by KPMG has said again that Canada is the most tax competitive nation globally, and we are amongst the nations as well when it comes to the cost competitiveness of businesses doing investing in our nation as well. Not unlike many other nations globally as well. Both our national government and our provinces will invest with companies who are prepared to invest in our nation. A quick comment as well, and I know the overall message and discussion is around globalization and you know, is it good? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Canada is a nation of 35 million people. We have tremendous resources. We have well-educated people. We have an economy that's strong, that's innovative, strong banking system. To maintain a level of prosperity long-term, Canada has been and needs to be a trading nation. So from Canada's perspective, good, open, fair trade is a good thing. It provides opportunity for people in jurisdictions across the world to raise their standard of living, if again it is fair, if it's based on strong values, rule of law, etc. Canada, you may say that we're swimming a little bit against the stream right now, but over the last week, we just signed a comprehensive trade agreement with Europe. And we're the first nation to have comprehensive trade agreements to the level that we have in the globe, in terms of, if you think of where we are with a number of trade agreements globally. So I think I'll probably leave it at that. I probably have gone over my time, but if people have questions after, I'll certainly leave points of contact, etc. Again, Canada is a global leading nation when it comes to trade. Trade has tremendous opportunities. We're working between New England now and, as an example, Toronto and southeastern Ontario, Montreal on specific clusters, opportunity to grow our sectors on both sides of the border. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, David. And David is the former premier up in New Brunswick, Canada. And I had the opportunity to work with him back then, managing the energy for the province. So he's absolutely very astute in all the related issues. So thank you again, David. Now, of course, to go cross back and forth, we have many issues, border-related issues, immigration-related issues. And so, Ellen, I believe you're going to address those things, right?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
And, thank you, Honorable David Allwood. We're thrilled to have you here as our Consul General to New England and promote and tell the rest of the U.S. about all the wonderful things in Canada. And thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Ellen Keefe. I am a dual national, born in Canada and living here. I'm a U.S. and Canadian citizen, so I have very strong ties, relations, and interest in both U.S. and Canada, and certainly see the wonders of both. And so what's so nice is that we do a lot of cross-border work, and we have a lot of strong relationships. In going into what Mr. Allwood was talking about, in order to effectuate having businesses in both countries, immigration takes its prominence in terms of how do we get people over here, how do we get people back to Canada. I'm a U.S. immigration practitioner, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about U.S. immigration law and highlight some of the strong relationships and special visas and NAFTA that we have with Canada to bring Canadians here into the U.S. and the ties and relationships with our investor visas that are also part of our NAFTA treaty. So I'm going to start off telling you first that immigration is what we consider and call alphabet soup, because we have a lot of different types of visas and we have to try and see who best fits into these types of visas. And it can get quite complicated, and I will give some general advice, but obviously strongly advise that every case is individual, and you certainly, for personal interest, want to seek out personal advice. So as much and as kind as visas are, there's also various steps that need to be taken in order for things to run smoothly. So I'm going to start off with Canadians wanting to come in and visit the U.S. as a business visitor. And what does that mean? They want to go and they are seeking out a property to set up their business here in the U.S. They want to come here and go to the conference, for example, for today, Canadians coming here to come to the conference. They want to meet with managers, lawyers. They have a business that's set up both in the US and Canada, and they want to meet with some of their executives or managers or business people here. How do the Canadians come here? Well, there are sort of two options. As a business visitor, Canada is one of the very few countries where it's visa exempt. Canadians do not need a visa to travel here for business. The word business, however, is one of those areas where when you cross the border, where we have CBP, which is Customs Border Protection, says, oh, you're coming to the US to do business. Oh, yes, I'm coming to do business. I'm meeting with some managers. Well, the question is, are you going to be working here? Well, I guess I'll be working here. I'm meeting with visitors. Well, if you say you're going to be working here, then you better have a work visa, because you will not qualify under the visa exempt to do any productive work in the U.S. where you are going to be making any financial gain here. So what we always do is we advise our clients when they're coming to the U.S. that visa exempt is very nice, but you better be well prepared. And how do you be well prepared? It's always about the documentation and the evidence that you bring with you, because most folks, especially when they're coming here to the US, don't want to spend time what we call secondary, where they might be questioned or stay for hours, miss their meeting, or be turned away, or have something written up that they're coming here under the wrong or fraudulent intent, which can carry with them. So how do you be prepared? So you want to have, for example, if you were coming to the conference here today, have printed out information about your conference, that you got your ticket, that you have a return flight home, that you're staying at whatever hotel, and what exactly is your schedule while you're here. You also want to make sure that you're not going to have problems with any particular reason why they will not allow you to come in. If there's any kind of history with an overstay in the US, or you came on a visa previously and that visa is no longer valid. So in recap, yes, it's really nice that we have visa exempt, that you don't need to apply for a visa in that particular case, but you want to be well prepared. We also have what's called a B1, B2, which a lot of the rest of the world has. B1 is traveling for business, B2 is traveling for pleasure. If we are working with people who come back and forth often to the US, at some point, we call it de novo. Each time you enter, it doesn't matter if you entered 1,000 times without a problem. That one time can cause a problem. So if you're coming back and forth as a visitor, for example, you want to look for property here because you're interested in starting a business. You're starting a business here, you're going to meet with lawyers, you're going to meet with people who are doing your business plan, you might work with real estate, commercial real estate agents, you're looking to hire people who are here. At some point, crossing back and forth on the border, they're going to say to you, too much, too often. You cannot enter unless you get a visa for that particular work that you're planning on doing. And why I mention that is we have a visa called an E1, E2. So it's a treaty investor, treaty trader visa. It's a wonderful visa, and I'll describe an E2 visa. For example, we work with business people. We work with students and graduate students who are coming and they want to set up a business here in the US. With they coming in to start a business in the US, they're going to want to be coming back and forth to set up their business. Coming in as a B1, B2, coming back and forth, at some point they might say, you can't enter as a B1, B2 anymore, go get your E2 visa in order to enter. So you want to make sure that when you're coming in, that it's productive, that you have the documentation, that you're well prepared, and you're very clear that your immigration intent when you're coming in means you have no intent to remain in the US. You're coming here strictly as a visitor. So it gets a little bit challenging when you're coming here to try and set up a business and say that you have no intent to stay here, where obviously you have intent to stay here because you're setting up a business. So what I'm going to highlight is, for example, on our E1, E2 treaty trader, treaty investor visas, it's a non-immigrant intent visa where usually it's a 2-year visa, although there is a ability to stay here for 5 years, depending on whether you're traveling, and you can keep renewing and renewing and renewing your visa. So what does it mean to be an E2? I'm going to segue into an E2 visa. For example, you want to set up, and I'll say a retail store. And in order to have or qualify for an E2, we have to have a treaty with the country. So we have a treaty with Canada, for example, and we have treaty with other countries, about 38 other countries. And you want to start a business here. So what can you do to start a business here? Well, what we have is 2 sort of litmus tests, and that's called marginality and substantiality. And what that means is that, are you going to put in enough money into this business that's at risk to show that you are substantially investing? That means that you are putting a good faith effort into having a business here that is going to be successful. It can't be money that you can get back and return. It has to be at risk because the government wants to see that you're pretty serious about having a business here. And in terms of marginality, they want to know that you're going to make enough money for you and your family, or a little bit more, to be able to sustain that business. So we have people here on treaty investor visas for 30 years. Every 2 years, every 5 years, they keep renewing their visa. So it's a wonderful option for people who want to be here and have a business here, but they must continue with their business in order to stay here. What some people do is they might be able to transition into another visa or a green card visa, depending on their situation. But E1, E2 is a non-immigrant intent visa. I'm going to just quickly speak of a few more and then kind of put it into more practical terms. Canadians are very fortunate also because we have a treaty which is a TN visa. A TN, which is a treaty national visa. It used to give Canadians the ability to stay here 1 year, depending on the job. Okay, it's all job related. Up to a year. We now have the ability for Canadians to stay here up to 3 years, which is really a nice advantage for Canadians. So a Canadian worker, somebody who graduated, they want a job here in the US, they have to show that they have a job, that it fits under the umbrella of the different work classifications that we have within the treaty. So if you're a computer, engineer, accountant, lawyer, those are some of the categories where you have to fit into in order to be eligible for the TN. So it's a wonderful opportunity for Canadians to come here up to 3 years to work in a business. And another thing about the TN is that, like the E2, you can renew it. So you can be here for 20, 30 years on a TN if you continue to be eligible. I'm just going to make a note about the TN, though, and that is that there's categories that you must fit into. Those categories were set up about 20 years ago. So there was a bill, it's a 900-page bill that actually had passed in the Senate and was sitting in the House, was an Immigration Comprehensive Reform Bill. And on that bill was information as to what we should do in terms of the visa categories to update them. Because years ago, we didn't even have cell phones, right? We didn't have Android engineers. So those don't make the list. And the comprehensive immigration reform was used so that we can update the categories to best resemble what the fields are that people study in today and to best utilize that for folks to enter in on a TN visa. So I'm just going to sort of wrap up in terms of, because of the particularities, we also have, H-1B visa, which is what we call a dual intent visa. That's a nice visa that's opened to most countries, except there's a limitation. There's a $65,000 limitation for undergraduates and a $20,000 limitation for graduate students. And what happens is on April 1st, which is the first day you can apply for an H-1B for an October 1st start date, within that first 5 days, we have what's called a lottery system because they're all used up. And so if you don't get chosen in the lottery, then you have to think about what other options are available. So for Canada, for example, a TN visa, or what we call an intercompany transferee, which is an L1A or an L1B visa, which is executives and managers who want to come here. For example, you have a hotel in Canada, let's say a Marriott hotel, and they want to send their executives and managers here to train for a new opening of a hotel. Or you have a bank, you have TD Bank in Canada, and you are opening up a new branch here, and you want to train your executives and managers. Oftentimes they'll come in on what's called an L1A or an L1B. It's an intercompany transferee where you have to have been working at least 1 year in the past 3 years full-time for that company. The L1A, you get up to 7 years. The L1B, which is more of a specialty work that you can come up, is on a 5-year application. The nice thing about the L1A and the L1B is that you can transfer into a green card application if you qualify. So this is just some of the large swimming pool of alphabet soup of visas. And what's nice is that between US and Canada, that we want to continue to be able to help effectuate trade by allowing people and businesses to easily go back and forth and to continue on, at least with some type of agreement or treaty, to be able to continue that process and also be able to expand on it as much as we can. So I'm going to leave it at that. And also, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and I'd be happy to talk with you.
Right. We'll also have some Q&A at the end. And then, of course, then if you want one-on-one with Ellen, right afterwards. Ellen, thank you. Wonderful. I didn't know all that. So it's good. All right. So John Hancock Manulife, one of the largest financial services companies in the world, now is a Canadian-owned financial institution. And we have Tim, who's the Chief Innovation Officer over there, to speak regarding innovation, financial services, cross-border relationships. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for coming. A quick commercial on Manulife, just so you can understand the scale of it. It's based in Toronto. We have about 35,000 employees. It's a $35 billion-ish company. We do business in about 15 countries, 2 of which are the U.S. and Canada. I just spent 17 days in Asia and 10 in Europe, so I'm on the road a lot doing this thing. But it's a 100-and-something-year-old company, and about 12 years ago, Manulife bought John Hancock, which is a 150-year-old company. And so all the business that's done in the U.S. is under the John Hancock brand, and all the business that's done in Canada and 13 countries in Asia and Europe is under the Manulife brand. A unique thing about financial services that I guess I would point out that's probably different than other goods and services transferring cross borders is there's not a lot of cross-border financial services in the world. Money movement and payments and wires go cross-border fairly easily now, but most things are very, very domestic. Meaning if you're a Canadian citizen or a U.S. citizen, you can't open a brokerage account or a custody account or a bank account in another country, and that has to do with the financial services products are regulated at a local level. And it's even more difficult in the insurance space because in the U.S., and this goes back hundreds of years, I guess, insurance is regulated at a state level. And so it's just difficult, basically. And so what do large financial services companies do to grow globally? They transfer people, right, with these LB1 visas, the alphabet soup visas. They transfer people, they transfer technology, they transfer capital, they transfer knowledge and work processes, relationships, et cetera, across borders, and basically plant their seeds in different countries and grow and develop their brands. Manulife and John Hancock is fairly unique, oddly enough, in the financial service world. There's not a lot of firms that are based in North America that do so much business in Asia. It's normally you see a European-based financial services company that does business here and in Asia. So we're on a list of just a few that decided to go that way rather than the other way. About 100 years ago, actually, we've been operating in Asia. With respect to my job, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, which usually 65% of the people hear that and say, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a Chief Innovation Officer? And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But I also run, I have some other title like president or something of our Manulife New Ventures, which is our corporate venture capital entity. And so that entity invests in startups, mostly in the fintech, wealth tech, and insurtech space, early stage startups that we think will help us bring our transformative businesses to life. And so we do that here in the US, Europe, Canada, and a couple countries in Asia. So it's kind of it's a fun thing. It's getting very busy for me because I sit on a lot of boards. But
I'm just going to say your incubator, your space here.
Yeah, and so part of so going back to the Chief Innovation Officer thing, a couple things that you do if you're in this titled role at big old companies. The first thing is you're trying to make it relevant for the next 50 years. The pace at which, and everybody probably knows this, but the pace at which businesses that can be reduced to zeros and ones, technology, basically, information businesses, the pace at which those are going out of business is accelerating. And they're being replaced by companies that figured out that the thing that's getting traded back and forth is intellectual property that can be reduced to zeros and ones, not bending metal and physically moving cars or books for that matter. These businesses are under healthy competitive threat from smaller companies that think that the economic model isn't in the best interest of end consumers. And they're probably right over time. It's good, healthy competition, but financial services is right on the precipice of being, as they say, quote, disrupted. And I can answer questions about what is disruption and what isn't, because there's a lot of hype around it, and it doesn't happen as often as anybody thinks. So the first job of the Chief Innovation Officer is to keep your company relevant, and that means you need to disrupt yourself. You need to take the fight to yourself, and you need to invent those businesses and those new models and those new distribution channels and the new customer segments and the new products and services that mean something to buyers of the future versus buyers of the past. And so that's one of the things we do. And the way you do that is you both organically build stuff, you buy small companies, and you invest in startups. And the space that you need to think differently and do differently in order to do those three things. And so what we did was we created a lab of forward thinking called the Loft, and we built one here across the street in Boston where I sit. Waterloo, which is probably one of the most underestimated technology centers in the world. It's crazy what's happening in Waterloo. All of Google's apps business is run out of Waterloo from a lot of the former employees of BlackBerry and RIM. So that didn't just go away. It just transferred the knowledge to the next company, and it helps both the U.S. And Canada as well as other countries for that matter. So a lot of big companies have established a wonderful presence right outside of Toronto. So we have a lab there, we have a lab in Toronto, we have one in San Francisco that's built around a little software company that we bought a year ago, and in Singapore, where I just was a few weeks ago. And so those spaces, and they look different when you see them. It's all glass, and so it looks like, like a ping pong tables and all that kind of stuff. And those are the spaces where people, when they enter, they can actually think differently than the people that are in charge of keeping the 100-year-old business running. And so there's a stable, risk-averse, scalable, efficient environment that keeps the brand safe and keeps the business running. And then there's another environment that's built for speed and experimentation. And that's kind of the magic formula. And since there aren't a lot of people in the room, I'm free to share that magic formula with you. But anyway, so the space, the policies and procedures and rules of operating that space is basically how companies can do this. There are some companies that do what I call innovation theater. Most actually do that. They do hackathons, they have labs and they have accelerators and they do incubation. And most of it is for show. It makes them feel good. They look good doing it. They energize their workforce. They energize their network. And rarely does it yield to actual business value. It's important to have the theater because it does fire people up and it does attract people to your brand. It helps attract younger employees. It attracts investors. But if it doesn't lead to any business value, it's not sustainable. And so we're always battling with the blend between what is the theater versus what is what I call applied innovation. And then on the investing front, the startups thing, we do that not to gain returns on investment. We don't really care so much about, because when you're a $35 billion thing, investing in startups is not the way you're going to move the economic needle. We do it to de-risk a commercial deal with that startup. Because the other part of being in a big business is all the people that work in it don't want to lose their jobs, so they don't want to do business with a startup that's money losing that could go out of business because they'll look bad, like they made a bad decision. And so we invest in them, and then we can sit on the board, and then we can see if they're going out of business in the future, and then start to work up plan B, because if you don't have a plan B, you don't have a plan A. And so that's been very, very helpful for us. And if we start to see things rattle in the company that we're invested in, then we'll just buy the whole thing. And you end up doing that in very, very small increments of money versus sort of the companies that say, oh, I'm going to adopt some new tool. No offense to Microsoft, but I'm going to adopt the new Microsoft tool. That adoption of that stable, best-of-breed, leading brand tool doesn't allow any company to do anything different than the other 1,000 companies that bought that tool. And so you won't find your way into the future of business by buying stable products from stable companies. But that's probably drifting off in a different direction. And so basically, we do business all over the world. So we are right smack dab in the middle of immigration. And how do you think about, as a company, reducing the borders and the differences between the cultures and the economic systems enough to make the sum of the whole greater than the sum of parts of all your people that work there. And that's a daily challenge that we go through. So questions as we go, I guess, and I'll pass it over to our moderator, John.
I again apologize for the glasses, but I've got some issues with my right eye, so I apologize, folks, for the glasses. The glasses are more appealing than my right eye. Yeah, and I kind of, do I look cool? The hair. Yeah, that's the intent, Well, that was excellent. And who knew that John Hancock Manulife was doing all that? Because, for those of us that think they're a large, old insurance company, that's not true. So that was very interesting. And again, I'm blessed to have two very close friends, Brooks Tingle and Jimmy O'Brien, who live in my town of Oxford, Massachusetts, working for the organization. And they do rave about some of the innovative things that John Hancock Manulife is doing. Now, I'm the energy guy, so I get to bring up the rear and talk a little bit about, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, I put a myriad of notes together, and I just want to cite a few things because a lot of people in New England specifically do not understand the trade between Canada and the United States and New England and Atlantic Canada on energy. And I deal with it on a daily basis, and I think it's really important for a lot of people to understand how much we are interdependent on one another as we go forward, and frankly, every single day. So, I have a couple notes that I'd like to share with you. And here we go. Nope, it's not going to show on the screen. You okay with that? Okay, good. So, again, Canada and the United States, they are tightly integrated, and they're integrated through pipelines and through electricity grids. Obviously, Canada is the largest and most secure supplier of foreign oil, natural gas, electricity, and uranium. I don't know if everybody knew that. But here's one that many people don't know. Canada, not Saudi Arabia, not OPEC, Canada is the U.S. largest supplier of crude oil. Now, who knew that besides David and I? Oh, Suzanne. Okay. But not a lot of people understand that. The bilateral energy trade between the two countries is over $130 billion per annum. I repeat, $130 billion. We're now up to about 3.5 million barrels a day, or is it? Yeah. Excuse me. And it has increased roughly over 55% over the past few years, which again is rather significant. Number two, how many people knew that companies like Enbridge and Enbridge Gas New Brunswick up in Canada are now making significant investments down here in the United States? What does that mean? The pipeline that brings gas to this market, there are two of them. Number one, Algonquin comes from the south and comes into our market. Number two, Maritimes Northeast Pipeline comes from New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, down into New England. They're owned by a company called Spectra. Well, it was recently announced, approximately 4 or 5 weeks ago, that Spectra is being purchased by Enbridge Gas New Brunswick, but the parent company, Enbridge. And that is about a $28 billion transaction. Now, over the past 12 months, we've had Emera Energy Holdings, which is based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They own Emera Maine, which used to be Bangor Hydro, and many other assets throughout New England, but have recently purchased and closed and now operate Tampa Electric and Light. Well, everybody hears about Florida Power and Light, how large they are. Well, the second largest in Florida is Tampa Electric and Light, and that is now owned by Emera, which again, Canadian company. And then more recently announced was TransCanada. And everybody hears about TransCanada transporting oil and natural gas across Canada and the United States. They recently announced they're buying Columbia Gas, which is a Midwestern pipeline organization. So you're seeing a huge, if you will, investment from Canadian oil and energy companies coming into the United States, which is increasing that integration and trade between the two countries. A lot of people don't understand all that. Now, let's bring it local. Let's talk about our Northeast Quadrant and Atlantic Canada, which we deal with every day. Well, in order for us to get electricity and to keep these lights on every single day, there's connectivity between our two countries. And there's connectivity, really two primary lines, one in Maine and another one in Vermont, that brings electricity, hydroelectricity, actually in New Brunswick's case, both nuclear, oil, other forms of electricity down into this market. And again, people don't realize that when it's really cold and really hot, if we didn't have Quebec and their generation, New Brunswick and their generation, we wouldn't be able to keep the lights on. And people don't understand that. We had dispatch on August 11th. I don't know how many people remember, it was a real hot day. It was about 99 degrees. Heat index was over 100. And so what happened? The grid was taxed. The tie line went out. And so we imported electricity from upstate New York, from Canada. And then obviously New Brunswick came to the rescue for the northern part of New England. And again, people don't know that because the lights stay on. But guys like me who are in the industry get these alerts. This is what's going on. And if you're managing large customers and paper mills, et cetera, or if you're dealing with regulatory issues, you understand that this happens often throughout the year. Natural gas pipelines. Many people here, I'm sure, heat their homes, their apartments, or work with businesses that use natural gas. Two primary pipes coming into this area. TransCanada, we talked about, which comes from the Quebec region, et cetera, comes down in, and then enters through New Hampshire. And then, of course, Maritimes, as we talked about, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, again, all the way down into Boston. And then, of course, we talked about other pipeline connectivities like the Iroquois pipe, also owned by TransCanada, connectivity, again, through upstate New York and then back down into Connecticut, into the region. Over 10% of our electricity generation is from Hydro-Quebec. which is a large Canadian hydro supplier. 10%. Hydro. Again, people don't know that. So as I always say, who knew? Well, some of us know, but most don't. And then there are many projects that we talk about. Access Northeast, the Kinder project, which unfortunately was canceled, but it was going to help New Brunswick, taking gas the other way, and actually helping them meet their demand during peak times. And from a grid perspective, Northern Pass, the Vermont line, and there are other connectivity projects that we hope come to fruition. So there is a huge, significant reliance between our two borders to meet the energy needs. As a matter of fact, now Canada is importing natural gas because of the shale revolution in Pennsylvania. Who would have thought that years ago? Back in 2005, everybody thought liquefied natural gas was going to explode and there would be more imports. But instead, the shale revolution started, and now shale's being exported to Canada. The last couple pieces are, if you go up into New Brunswick, there are two very important pieces of energy infrastructure up there that David dealt with on a daily basis and I dealt with on a daily basis. Number one is Canaport, and that's a joint venture between Repsol and Irving, and that is a liquefied natural gas facility, 10 BCF of storage, and that gas is imported from around the world and brought into our market, both New Brunswick and northern New England during peak times. So we're very reliant on that. Secondly, many people don't know that I assume everybody in this room drives a car of some sort, but 60% of your refined gasoline is from Canaport, the Irving refinery in St. John's, New Brunswick. St. John, no S on that one. And again, people don't know that. So you may be getting your gas from Mobil, you may be getting your gas from Speedy or Speedway, but actually the refined product is actually coming from New Brunswick, 60% of it. And again, a lot of people don't understand that. So there's a huge reliance between our two countries, but specifically this region, and how we move forward all remains to be seen. Now, the New England Canadian Business Council has an energy conference coming up on November 16th and 17th. I encourage all of you to attend, but a lot of those issues will be addressed. It's very, very interesting times, to say the least. With that, I think I took my time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. Questions? Oh, David, go ahead.
Yeah, just building on what... Okay. Just building on what John said, and John said Canada provides a huge amount of energy for the U.S., which we do. The reality, and I talked about bilateral trade and it being truly bilateral, the U.S. is Canada's largest provider of energy as well, in terms of imported energy. So more than 50% of what Canada buys actually comes from the U.S. So it's completely or fully integrated. And the other quick comment is, when we hear a lot about the importance of clean energy and dealing with climate change, Canada's electricity grid, 70% of Canada's electricity comes from hydropower, from clean energy. Over 80% now comes from non-emitting or non-impact on like our GHG impacts. Over 80% comes from non-impact energy. So we've got a great story to tell, and we have a great resource. So the potential is to continue to grow that relationship with the U.S. in places like the Northeast.
Excellent. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience. Myriad of topics obviously discussed today, but again, all those topics are the business globalization back and forth and how we do business between the United States and Canada. And we have our first question in the back, please.
Sure. This one, great. There's a couple questions embedded in there, but I'll just start at the top. We spent a couple years studying this, and we looked at all the industries that have been, quote, disrupted in the U.S. and a few other countries over the past 20 years by technology. And what we discovered was that disruption only happens in distribution. And that was like a big discovery, and I had to pull my car over to think about it and write it down because I don't know how to use Siri. And so what I mean by that is there's a ton of innovation that happens in manufacturing businesses and distribution businesses, but the ones that get flipped over, pulled apart, reassembled, and don't look like they used to are all in the things that have to do with distributing a product from somebody who makes it to the person that needs it. And so when you think about the biggest in the world disruptor is Amazon. They don't make anything. They're just distribution. iTunes and the App Store is why people buy the iPhone. Otherwise, it's just a prettier BlackBerry with a crappy keyboard. But they buy it because it distributes software, millions of developers worth of software. And so no one goes to software stores. And if you look at music and newspapers and everything, real estate, travel agency, recruiting, all the industries that have been fundamentally changed. Uber, and there's a technical debate of whether Uber is disruptive. Clayton Christensen, who writes about this, the innovator's dilemma and things like that, he would say that Uber's not disruptive because it starts at the top. It's kind of a black car service that's trying to work its way down, whereas real disruption happens at the very bottom where no one's watching, and they go after underserved clients with kind of sort of something that kind of works for underserved people at low cost. And as they get their footing, then they go up market. And so you can see with Amazon, they start off in books, and now you can buy anything. So disruption is something I think it's worth people knowing about. And if you are in the distribution business of something, then that can be turned into zeros and ones. Then chances are something's coming. It's coming for you, and you've got to prepare for it. Whether that translates into pipelines to distribute oil and gas, I don't think so, because it's kind of finances is on the precipice, because all it is a zero and one business. In the mid 80s, the business fundamentally and forever went from physically moving stock certificates from one part of Wall Street across the street, which is why they all used to be next to each other. They physically moved ownership of things. That went away 35 years ago. And since then, there's been no physical trade really in financial services besides cash out of an ATM, which is kind of going away too. Everything else is just distribution of IP from a manufacturer of something to somebody who has a problem. And so it will change violently and aggressively. And the spot that'll have the biggest impact in financial services is the people that work in between the person with the solution and the person with the problem. And so specifically, if you think about it in the U.S., there's 350,000 advisors who do financial advisory and stockbroker stuff like that. They're gatekeepers and middlemen and distributors of someone's product to someone who has money. And chances are, over time, and it won't go off a cliff, but over time there'll be fewer of those jobs needed. And that portends the bigger issue. Because the fact that an industry changes is life, and it's been going on for thousands of years. The speed at which it's about to change is the scary part, because humans don't evolve as fast as the technology is. And it will be quite an existential discussion and philosophical, generational thing that the whole world goes through when there are fewer and fewer and fewer jobs for people, especially the higher paid ones, because the lower paid ones have been going away for a while.
If I could just add a brief comment on that. And if you look at a lot of the discourse that's happening globally right now around globalization and trade, very, very often, it gets to the point where people in communities see jobs disappearing. The reality is it is a much more complex issue than what people are able to ultimately grapple with. And it gets to the very point that Tim's talking about in terms of that disruption that's taking place in huge sectors. You look at what's going on within the manufacturing sector. And, very often you hear some of the discourse out there that jobs are disappearing from the US or from Canada to Mexico or to China or to wherever, when in reality, a lot of what's taking place is those very manufacturing processes are changing significantly. And so, even if you're able to bring manufacturing jobs back to a place, it's not going to look like it did 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 50 years ago. And that whole disruption piece, I think, is something, and it's really hard, at least from my perspective, and when I was in political leadership, difficult to be able to work with citizens and people who are going through it themselves, and at the pace and the unrelenting pace that it is too, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's a whole 3-day conference of all day. It's a 3-year conference. The world has to get their head around this, because and this isn't yelling fire in a movie theater, but it hasn't even started yet. It's about to start. If you look at in financial services and maybe a few other industries, there's an invention called blockchain, which is basically a ledger, an accounting system that runs a thing called Bitcoin. Maybe people have heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is to blockchain what a deck chair is to the Queen Mary. It is just a small thing that rides on this big thing. And blockchain will basically change forever. Blockchain may be as big as the internet as far as changing systems that do stuff. And it used to be that people did that stuff. And so that'll be technology. That will be violently overshadowed by 3D printing. And nothing will change manufacturing more. So everything I say about disruption and distribution will change when 3D manufacturing allows you as individuals to make about 95% of what you go to the store to buy at home, by downloading the design and the material. I mean, it's coming, and it's going to be great for a lot of people and really, really, really bad for a lot of people. And we don't have the governmental infrastructure or the societal scaffolding to deal with this change. And so you see things like Brexit, and you see all of this stuff as a response to my cheese is moving faster than my parents' cheese moved, and I don't know what to do about it. So I just want to throw gas at this thing. And it's happening here in the U.S. on a pretty big level too. So,
Great question, great discussion. Additional questions? Yes, go ahead, right here. Yes, sir.
So right now, there's innovation about the fintech, about blockchain, right? But do you have some comments about how this technology would affect the globalization and the whole economy?
sure. A lot is the first comment. It will affect it a lot in ways that are kind of unpredictable and unplanned for. Certainly, number one is there'll be a lot fewer people needed to do the jobs that they used to do in this financial services, which ultimately is probably for society a better thing. That, because there's fewer people that work in the industry than the number of people that need the help that the industry could provide. And right now, a whole lot of people are trapped out of good financial advice and healthy retirement planning. 500 million people need help with money, and only handfuls of millions really get it by the nature of the opacity of the industry and the costs associated and that human connection that needs to be formed. So ultimately, it'll probably be a good thing. It's going to put a lot of people out of work. Two, it will actually be one of the tools that helps globalize. Whether this is good or bad is another thing. Everybody will have to make their own trade out of this. It'll globalize financial services faster than anything else, specifically, and probably a whole bunch of knock-on effects too, specifically because of identity management. The number one reason why people don't want to do business across borders is OFAC and anti-money laundering and terrorist financing and drug cartel financing. And so everybody says you have to know exactly who your customer is, which means you have to get documents and read physically look at passports and IDs and things like that. Blockchain makes all that go away because identities become immutable inside of this blockchain. And so therefore commerce could speed up because you don't have to wonder who's on the other side of a trade. That will just like creating the highway system in the U.S., right, coming out of the war, I think, massively changed interstate commerce in the U.S. and basically, literally, no pun intended, paved the way for serious economic growth. Blockchain will do that globally as long as people use it for good and not probably for bad, I'd say. So
There is disruptive change, believe it or not, in the energy business.
fracking is...
Well, obviously, natural gas fracking was just very disruptive. And it allows us to get rid of the coal and other oil-based emission-based units. So it is a bridge to a renewable future. And people don't realize that, but it's really, really beneficial to the environment and the emissions. It's cleaner, it's more cost-effective, et cetera. But let's go a little further ahead. As battery storage becomes more and more developed, we're going to start seeing batteries enter the marketplace, first and foremost at the home, and then at the larger businesses as they can scale. And I don't know if, for those that might have seen Elon Musk's press conference on Tuesday night, but he announced the size of a solar panel for a roof, the size of this computer. And so the idea is they've come up with 4 different styles that would, architectural, this, that, new wave, that could be used on your house. Now, the problem is, again, got to get the cost down, got to have the battery storage to be able to take all that, but it's coming. And that is so disruptive to a grid-based system where you can now generate your own electricity at your home affordably, store it, and then use it as you need it. That is going to turn the grid system that as we know it, upside down. And utilities are going to plead Armageddon, and they're going to be marching to Washington to try to basically get some form of subsidy and payback, because we have billions of dollars, trillions of dollars invested in infrastructure from that perspective. So it's going to be very interesting times. Now, we're not going to see this immediate, but 10, 15 years from now, it's coming. And so I think everybody needs to be aware of that. Other questions? We have 1 more minute. Oh, in the back.
Yeah, that's my whole job, so I could talk about this forever. So yeah, maybe somebody else should. Yeah.
I got a piece.
Yeah, we can all just do
It's that's just your question sort of somewhere embedded in my job description. So but it's really I guess I'll say this: very, very few companies that are older than 27 years, about that time. It's sort of around when the internet started to matter in about 94-ish, 93, 94, 95. If you're older than that, this is really, really, really hard because your winning formula, and the reason why you survived that long is because you kept change out. You stopped it, you blocked it, you built a competitive moat. You are a Mars bar. You're all the companies that Warren Buffett invests in. Almost no technology companies, and I still don't know why he invested in IBM, and I'm a big Berkshire Hathaway fan and owner. So I'm not biased against it, but there's a reason why those long-standing industries have durable competitive moats around them. And because they don't trade in zeros and ones. Most businesses going forward will have some element of technological impact to it, and it's just difficult to do. So most people talk about it, and they're trying to start to do something about it, but it's hard. It's hard.
I guess I'm going to address it from the immigration perspective. So the world is changing, jobs are changing. They're going to be morphed into something different where people are going to have to develop keep up to date and innovative. And I think one of the most important elements to make this happen is to be open to immigration and to expand on our immigration laws and to allow people from around the world to come help create and develop businesses here. So on the immigration front, I think it's crucial in terms of our government and our laws and immigration to be able to keep up with this changing world and this dynamic. And you know, like you were saying, it's going to happen so quickly that it would be in our best interest to make sure that we're well prepared in terms of immigration and having people with the ability to easily do work and travel and develop business and create innovative work together as a world rather than keep it just contained within individual countries.
Just one more quick thing. To that effect, if you're living in a country that's against bringing ideas and people in, you should move, because the circulatory system, the environment needed for a company, a country, a community to respond to the changes that we're all doing to ourselves, right? Because we haven't yet turned over our life to AI, to our artificial intelligence yet. If you don't embrace that and play offense with it, and you try to defend against it, it'll be such a violent reaction. And I read recently a quote that was bemoaning the job movements to other places, and it was just this really deep, ripped right out of the headlines piece in The Economist, and it was dated 1895. This has been going on forever. The speed at which it's happening is about to really tick hockey stick on us relative to what's happened over the past 100 years. And so it just sort of, it forces all of us to be more statesman-like. It forces all of us to be more open to the idea of joining forces to address it rather than dividing and separating, because that's the easiest way to die.
So with energy, since it has such a difficulty on scale, what you're seeing happening is technology is infiltrating the home, business, and manufacturing. And what I mean by that is distributed generation, in other words, again, solar or whatever it may be, but then also demand-side management. How do we use less? How do we become more efficient? Now, the more efficient home, the more efficient business through thermostats, sub-metering, building envelope. You're seeing it with lighting. Lighting has just changed tremendously. You're going to have this market right now with lighting is only 8% distribution with LED. It's predicted that it'll be over 50% within 5 years. It's rather significant because, again, and the cost have come down over 70% in the last 18 months. Rather significant. So you're seeing this huge change in this at the end user basis. In other words, the businesses, and how all that gets integrated too. Because again, you have to understand, all of a sudden I'm using less energy at a facility that I was using so much energy. Then a supplier or a generator or a utility gets angry because they've built their model based on a certain amount of energy use, certain amount of throughput to that facility, and now all of a sudden you're using 15 or 20% less. How does a utility deal with that? How does a power generator deal with that? And it's happening because, again, the time and the cost associated with large projects are taking so long, so technology is zooming in at the localized level. So it's very interesting times to watch that happen.
Maybe just wrapping a couple of things up. So again, when I was premier of a province, one of the things I said, and I still have some bruises to prove it, governments deal with things, and probably, and especially, thinking the long established business corporations we have, no matter what nation, we move at the speed of sound, or we communicate at the speed of sound, when in reality, change and the world is happening at the speed of light. And whether it's at the very local level of an individual and a family, a worker, or at the macro nation level and international level, that unrelenting change and how we deal with it, and when I say we, I say governments, and I'll say global leaders have to find a better way of connecting with citizens and helping, whatever that means, citizens adjust through this period. And you know, I'll bring it back to Canada. You know, as a nation right now, I don't know that I've ever been more proud to be Canadian. Now, I'm a Canadian, I'll say by choice. My dad and mom are both Canadians. They were going to school here. I was born here, have spent my life in Canada. But when I look at what's going on globally and where, you know, many countries are struggling, Canada has its struggles and challenges when it comes to economy. We're an economy historically solid, based on natural resources, et cetera, and we've heard some of the dynamic change that's taking place there. But at the same time, we're a small L liberal country that is based strongly on values, that has taken a different route right now in things like the Syrian refugees and being open and welcoming and transparent and tolerant. We're a country that is open to trade because we see the value when we're able to build strong economies and opportunities for our people. It builds prosperity across boundaries. And so I think at this point in time, because of everything that's taking place and the disruption, and it is only going to continue to increase in the way communication takes place, et cetera, and when it's easy to retrench, I think it's going to be more important than ever for countries to think outside and in a connected way or a global way. So I think that's the challenge that we all face and how we do it. But instead of being afraid of that change, effectively as leaders, whether that be business, community, or political leaders, how can we bring our citizens collectively through it? And that's going to be the dynamic. Personally, right now, I'm pretty proud of where we are as Canadians to face that. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy.
Well, again, please join me in thanking the panel, and we're very glad to be here, and thank you for participating. And I'm sure we'll be available afterwards for some questions. Thank you again.